Okay, Mary won't be here today because he has other obligations. But the way we are going to start to analyze these positions will be only by selecting the more interesting variations. So, because like for example in this group D over here, let me just pull up the study. Group D has 40 games in total, so going over everything means that we won't be able to finish everything by this year. So to make sure that we have a chance of finishing things as soon as possible, while not missing out on anything, we will be only selecting certain matches or certain games that are close or have educational purpose, or like um, different, or maybe they're just exciting or something like that, right? So if you have a game or a position that you absolutely want to be analyzed, you can always send the position into the Google form that I've sent into the Discord group. So you can just check it out there, or you can just DM me, or Mary as well, because every week we will be compiling these games. So for Group D, I have selected up to 8 games. So that's two matches and a lone game. So the first match that we'll be looking at is a match between Vadim and Zephyr. So Vadim and Zephyr, we'll be looking at all three of their games. So this is the first game here. In the Lichess study is chapter number 7. You can go to the description and find the link to where you can also look at this in real time and take a look at all the lines and stuff as I show it here on the board. So let's get things up. One moment. Okay, so this is the first game between Vadim and Zephyr, and it begins with e4, c6, we have a Caro-Kann, d4, d5, mainline. A nice tree over here is a very peculiar move. It really invites bishop takes, which of course is fine, but you don't really have to play it. It's not necessary if you don't think you want to give up your left square bishop. In this case, taking of course is the best move, because often in the Caro-Kann, the light square bishop can be a problem because you're planning to put all your pawns on light squares. So you want to get rid of your light square bishop and make use of your dark square bishop. So here, being able to develop or sort of get rid of your light square bishop in one move, and while disrupting your opponent's pawn structure at the same time, would definitely be a very good move. But instead, we have d takes e4, which is also fine. It takes advantage of the fact that white hasn't developed anything to actually defend this pawn, so maybe black has an idea of trying to hang on to the pawn with moves like maybe f4, f5 and knight f6. So here we have f4. Not sure what the idea is. And now bishop takes h3 is played. So the previous moves didn't really have anything to prevent this bishop takes h3 move. So black wasn't really punished for not playing bishop takes h3 earlier, because he gets the opportunity to capture it now. So g takes h3 has to be played, and now you can see that the kingside pawn structure is totally ruptured. Knight f6 was played, trying to hang on to this pawn. Maybe eventually there'll be some ideas of playing e6, bishop here, and then try to target all the weaknesses here. Maybe there's something like queen e7, something that we could see in the future. Knight c3 is played, trying to go after this pawn now. e6 is played, getting ready to develop the dark square bishop, and also creating this very solid Caro-Kann pawn structure. So b4 is played. It seems that over here, oh, I just realized, no wonder, this game isn't what I was looking for. This isn't Zephyr versus Bali, this is Zephyr versus Rarity. No wonder it didn't look quite like what I analyzed, so I was a bit confused. But you can see Rarity has been pushing a lot of flank pawns, and that's why a lot of advantage has been given over to Black. Wait, since when did I change? The stream is down. Never mind. So this is actually the game I want to show you because actually here just hung the pawn, bishop takes b4 was played, and now this piece is very hard to get rid of. The pawn, the knight is undefended, and then if you have to defend the knight, it's going to become very complicated. But here, yeah, this was not the game I wanted to show because they had a very big difference in strength. And the game I want to show is this one, Vladimir versus Zephyr. So here is e4, c6. Yeah, it was also a Caro-Kann. And instead of the main line grabbing more space with d4, we have d3 over here, a bit more passive. This is sort of like a King's Indian attack kind of setup where you want to play something like this and maybe prepare to attack on the king side. So it's called the prayer variation, but it's sort of like a King's Indian attack kind of variation. So d5 is played, following through with the main line. You prepare this move, so you're going to play it. Bishop e2, getting ready to castle quickly and then launch an attack on the king side. D takes e4, d takes e4. Queen takes, we see a trade of queens here. White decides to capture the bishop so that it preserves any castling rights if needed. You can see that both sides are actually equal in development in the sense that all the pieces are still on the back rank, both sides still have castling rights. But the difference is that white has a bit more space in the center. So knight f6 is played, developing, attacking the pawn. Knight c3, countering, counter defending. E5, grabbing more space. Knight f3, attacking, applying pressure to the pawn. Bishop d7, developing while also defending the pawn. But now this bishop is a little bit sad because it's going to be a bit hard to develop that bishop. Castles, getting the king to safety in this middle game, maybe perhaps getting some ideas on e1 in the future. Bishop b4, sort of attacking the knight because the knight doesn't really have anywhere to go to. Like it doesn't want to go back. It has nothing to do over here, and maybe an idea can be to reroute here because there is no knight to d5 thanks to this pawn on c6. So bishop d2, just developing while preserving the structure so that if takes you can take back, which is exactly what happens. So bishop takes. So white managed to sort of gain a tempo by developing, because you see black here spend the move playing bishop b4, spend the move taking, whereas white just developed and managed to be captured back, preserving the pawn structure. So far it's still a very even game. Knight takes e4 is played because the pawn was previously protected by the knight, and now black tries to win it back. But this is nothing serious because after bishop takes e5, white wins back the pawn. So once again, a very symmetrical structure. So here, if anything, black should be slightly careful because with the rook ready to go to e1 and all the things lining up over here, things might get a bit messy if black doesn't castle quickly. But black decides to capture first, and after knight takes, and then now only castles, to getting out of any danger from any potential rook e1 ideas. But rook e1 anyway, because it's a good move, developing the rook, chasing the knight away. So knight d6 was played. This is a very good move because you know how oftentimes as beginners we say that we like to see that you see knight f6 is a very natural square for the knight. We normally develop it here. We know it's very active and control the center over here. So whenever we capture the pawn and we are getting chased away, oftentimes, like maybe even if the knight was on g4 or e4, whenever the knight is kicked back with moves like rook e1 or h3, we like to just move the knight back to its original square because it's doing great there. But here black shows either good understanding or unwillingness to go back to the original square, which is actually oftentimes a good thing to consider, and decides to consider other alternatives the knight can go to besides just going back, and finds that knight d6 is more suitable in this point because it controls more squares in the center. There is no real fight left for these four squares. Like for example, if you go back to knight f6, you're taking control over this part of the center, you're fighting for control over that part of the center, but the center pawns have all been traded off already. So knight d6 is actually a better move to exert more control over the center this way instead. So g4 is played, sort of an aggressive move, perhaps trying to start an attack on the king side, maybe trying to target this pawn perhaps. f6 is played, kicking the knight away. Black is uncomfortable with this move. However, this is a bit weakening given that white still has a light square bishop, and this is opening up a very powerful diagonal for the white side. So knight d3 is played, retreating back. Again, it's very nice to see that players are not just blindly retreating back to the original squares, but considering other alternatives. And knight d3 is for the same reason as knight d6. It's a much better square for the knight because it exerts more control over the center like this. since the fight over the center pawns is already over. And of course, there's also a tactical reason as to knight f3 will simply just hang the pawn over here because it was previously defended by the bishop. So good play and understanding from both sides, keeping this a very even game. Knight d3 was played. Here we have knight f7. We see an interesting maneuver, perhaps wanting to reroute the knight over here to perhaps e5, or maybe to blockade the pawn here on g5, and perhaps jump down here in the future. And here we see f4. We can see that white is insisting on trying to break open the king side, perhaps launch an attack. Knight h6 was played, which is a bit inaccurate, because although it does make a one move threat of threatening to capture the pawn, like you see there's now two defenders, two attackers and only one defender. The problem is that white can very easily, if white wants to perhaps defend the pawn, can play h3 as happened in the game, just make everything solid before preparing to attack, or even just go f5 right away. And after f takes, chase the knight away, and then maybe get a pawn in. Although playing g5 right away isn't very accurate, it's still a potential idea. Alternatively, f5 can also be played, blockading this bishop and just making that the bishop's life miserable, creating some squares for the knight over here, and also still maintaining flexibility on to where the bishop can go, perhaps playing h3 in the future to sort of knock this knight out and force the knight back. But of course, it also comes with its own drawbacks. In the case where knight f7 is played, you can just go and develop again to an outpost square. Okay, h3 was played, just defending the pawn, maybe preparing for g5 in the future to break open the king side. b6 was played, recognizing that the bishop doesn't really have any use here on this diagonal and is trying to develop here on this diagonal instead. However, it is a bit slow, and white can take the opportunity to counter and hello, good afternoon. Good afternoon. So here, black's plan by playing b6 is, after recognizing that the bishop is severely blunted, it can't really do much. It seems like it can't really do anything active on this diagonal. So black tries to play b6 and develop and fianchetto instead. However, this isn't really a very good option, because by playing b6, you're making this c6 pawn tender, and the bishop actually does have a purpose on this diagonal, which is to protect this vulnerable light square diagonal over here towards the king. So the one way that white can take advantage of this is to recognize that black wants to play bishop b7 and play something like bishop f3. So you're attacking this tender pawn, and you're sort of giving black no chance as to how he wants to develop how they want to develop their bishop. So now bishop b7 is pretty much forced here, and this bishop is never going to do anything anymore. So now this diagonal is very weak because the light square bishop can no longer come and defend, and the light square bishop is, this pawn structure is very weak, and the light square bishop is undefended. So moves like c5 black is something black would want to play, but it can't be played. Previously, because the knight was controlling it, and now it still can't be played because the bishop now attacks the undefended light square bishop on b7. So if black wants to try and alleviate this pressure, it's going to take a long time. Maybe ideas like rook f7 and then c5, something like that. It's going to take some time. Meanwhile, black still has to be very careful of white's attacking ideas, such as something like g5, for example. But instead, bishop d7 was played. Bishop f3 was played. Okay, I'm surprised. Bishop f3 was indeed played, taking advantage of this situation. Good find from white over here. And here black decided to play bishop d7. So bishop d7 is kind of defending the pawn, but now this bishop is going to be on a very nice diagonal regardless, because it's sort of fianchettoed now on the long diagonal, and it can at any time jump over here to d5 to sit on this nice diagonal at any point if black decides to relieve the pressure by playing c5. Of course, already 4 minutes of deficit. Yeah, already 4 minutes of deficit, very big time trouble. So far, black has been playing very well, but black has been spending time, and now you can see that the inaccuracies are slowly starting to come out. So c4 was played, trying and I assume that it's because white calculates a bit and realizes that there is no real prospects of attacking on the king side, and perhaps is now trying to focus to go onto the queen side, maybe trying to exploit this pin over here. However, perhaps if this pin was to be exploited, maybe a better move would be something like b4, maybe trying to go b5 and try to attack this weakness over here. Of course, it's a very direct threat, but still it's still an idea nonetheless. But c4 is played instead. So c4, the idea perhaps that maybe after black possibly tries to resolve the issue, maybe it's something like rook c1, or maybe rook ae8, rook c8 or rook ae8, and then perhaps c5. Then maybe white can get into the center with this maneuver over here. Not sure what the idea is, but here black decides to play rook a d8. Very nice, recognizing that this c4 move destabilizes the knight. So previously the knight was defended and very stable here, exerting a lot of control over the center. However, after c4, the knight is no longer guarded. So rook a d8 is a nice move, trying to perhaps unleash some tactics in the future. Rook a d1, simply defending the knight. This move is fine. However, it sort of misses an opportunity of playing knight b4, which I assume was the idea of c5, where in the sense that black cannot really easily play c5 because it gives this beautiful outpost square, and black can't really access this knight at any point. So knight b4 might have been a nicer try to sort of exert a lot of pressure on this pawn, and there is no clean way for black to actually hold on to it. I said rook a d1 is played, okay, very solid. Okay, you attack, you want to unleash some attack here. I'm just going to defend. White is still playing very quickly. c5 is now played, so nice to sort of relieve this structural pressure. However, we now see the drawback of playing bishop d7 rather than bishop b7, which is the fact that now white can go bishop d5, so taking control over this strong diagonal, which was sort of foreshadowed a long time ago when black decided to play f6, this very weakening f6 move. And now basically king h8 is forced, but black decides to play knight f7 instead. The logic being that, you know what, the knight wasn't really doing that much here on h6 anyway, so you know what, I'm going to bring it back to defend. But now this knight is pinned, and moves like g5, f5 might really really start to be strong in the future. g5, of course, the idea is to break open the king side, maybe let the rooks come and take control. And f5, the idea is to let the knight come in maybe and force some unfavorable trades to get into the stronger position. Of course, there is also a tactical idea here, which was found by white, very strong and very good move. Rook e7, attacking the pin piece. It's something that we always learn, and it's also exerting pressure on this bishop over here. Now white is the one with potential tactics along the d file. Yes, you can see the time gap is slowly rising. Here we have a6 from black, perhaps sort of desperation move. Perhaps black is in a bit of a panic over here, perhaps trying to get some counterplay here with b5 perhaps. I'm not very clear with this a6 move. And here there's a good opportunity to play f5 and just sink the knight in. Get knight f4 in, potentially unleash some tactics here. However, that move wasn't really spotted. Instead, white goes for the ideal idea, goes for g5 instead to open up the king side, taking advantage of the fact that the knight cannot help to recapture. The knight no longer controls the g5 square. So here, bishop takes h3 was played, simply saying, ignoring the fact that the king side is under pressure, grabbing a pawn, but it also has a point of saying that, you know what, now that there are no tactics involving this diagonal over here and the d7 square where the bishop was previously. And if you try and attack my king, attack my bishop, maybe I can just retreat all the way back somewhere safe. So g takes f6 is played, opening things up on the king side. G takes f6 was played. And now knight f2. So because f5 wasn't played, the knight can't really jump in very quickly with bishop f4 and with knight f4 and knight e6. So instead, white decides to reroute the knight in a different manner, using knight f2 instead. Now going here to perhaps attack this weak pawn over here. Rook d7 was played, trying to trade off pieces as soon as possible. but here rook f7 was played. So regardless of which rook you capture back, this pin will still be sticking. So there might be ideas of, let's say, wait, actually, isn't this just hanging? Yeah, this is just hanging over here. But rook takes is more forcing. It sort of you don't want to hang a rook. If you take now, it's hanging. So if you rook takes first, then you're forced to take back. You don't have time to retreat your bishop because then there will be a discovery. You can win the rook. So rook f takes is pretty much forced because if you capture using this rook, yeah, if you capture using this rook, I think this is a bit stronger. Maybe something like this. This is much stronger because the rooks actually block the king. But if you capture using the f rook, it has there are a little bit more squares to work with. Although of course you still capture the knight. And this was actually the variation that was played. The f rook took back. F rook took back. Knight takes h3. King h8. Now stepping out the diagonal, but and saying that you cannot really capture my rook because your rook will be hanging with check. So king f2 was played, getting the king active, and now we see that white has 2 pieces for the rook, and white is now with only 1 minute left on the clock. So rook g7 was played. You don't want to let white eventually capture a rook, so rook g7 was played. f5, maybe now going for this maneuver over here with knight f4, knight e6, rook d8. The ideas of doubling up here on the g file. And now we see this maneuver. So knight f4. No, so turns out that black wanted to double up here instead. So now this bishop is pinned because it cannot move anywhere, or the rook will be captured. You can't really defend the rook because there are 2 attackers here. But on the other side, this threat isn't really anything because this bishop is unmovable. It's sort of an outpost now, and the knight can even come in here to e6 to attack the rook if necessary. So doubling up the rooks here don't really do much because if white wants, white can always keep the file closed. So knight e6 is played, getting an outpost. So now white's pieces are magnificent. Ideas of rook g8, rook g1, and asserting pressure here is coming as well. So rook b8 is played, moving the rook out of the way, perhaps trying to get some counterplay to destabilize this bishop by playing b5. Rook g1 was played, going for the idea, maybe moving the knight and then checkmating here, potentially. b5 was indeed played, trying to destabilize the bishop. Good move. Knight takes c5 was played. So rook c7, attacking the knight, trying to gain tempo and take here. But this doesn't really work because of this move here. Knight takes a6 with the fork, and after rook c5, sort of attacking the bishop, sort of getting out of the way, but actually simply still allowing the knight to take either one of the knights over here, either one of the rooks over here. And here, if let's say the game ended here, black resigned, but let's say knight takes b8 was played over here. Now white has a very strong threat of rook takes g8 checkmate. So in fact here, this is already forced mate in 12. So this is very interesting. So black has to be very careful over here. Rook c8 is pretty much forced to prevent this checkmate threat. You can still play something like knight d7 and then get more pieces in and try to force your pieces in, force the mate in, force a trade of pieces and sort of jail this king over here. But the position ended here after rook c5, black resigned, and as of now, Vadim is now ahead 1-0. In very solid play from both sides since the beginning, but white was just a bit faster, and black soon had to cave under time trouble, and soon the inaccuracies came out and tactics came out. So Still good game from both them nevertheless. Let's move on to the next game by Zephyr versus Vadim. So now Zephyr has the white pieces and has a chance to try and turn things around. So here we again have another e4 game. e5. Knight c3, very interesting. We have a Vienna game. And d6, a bit of a passive defense over here. A bit unusual to see this move, but it's still fine. Bishop c4 developing the bishop to a very active square. Knight f6 is played, attacking this knight, attacking this pawn. d3 defending, and now you have a symmetrical pawn structure. b6 trying to maybe play a sort of closed system by playing developing the bishop here to b7. This move isn't too great because if the bishop is eventually even developed over to b7, there isn't really much of a future there because of this solid pawn structure. And also, if you really want the bishop to take control over this long diagonal, you would need to open up the center, which would require moves like c6 and d5, for example, to open things up. However, with the move b6, this really weakens the light squares of the queen side and makes this d5 plan even harder to execute. So here f4 is played. White is trying to take advantage of the fact that black spent a lot of time trying to develop on the queen side by trying to develop an attack on the king side. So knight bd7 is played, defending the pawn over here. So knight f3 is played, preparing the castle, also asserting more control over the e5 square. Bishop b7 is played, and now here, after castles, you can see that actually white is in a nice spot already. Maybe something like after something like a3 or a4, giving a back off square for the bishop. We can see white perhaps gaining more space with something like f5 and attacking on the king side very quickly to take advantage of the fact that black is pretty cramped. All the pieces are stuck here, and black still isn't ready to castle anytime soon. Now g6 is played. Now this is even slow. You're spending even more time to try and develop, and you're taking even more time to castle, and it also provides a hook for white to attack. Maybe moves like f5 or h4, h5 can become very strong and help accelerate the attack in the future. In fact, over here in this position, there is a way to punish this move immediately with something like knight g5. This move puts a lot of pressure here on the f7 square, and is sort of like saying there is no good way to actually defend it because your bishop is on this diagonal and your knights are sort of blocking the king in. So even if you try and get out of the fork over here, even if you try and get out of the fork, maybe something like queen e7, you still go ahead and check with the bishop, force the king to run, and then you can start to open things up. And then you can see the white's pieces are very quickly going to flood in very soon. With moves like this maybe, and the king will be very vulnerable in the center. But instead, f5 was played, also very logical, using the fact that this g6 move was played to try and open things up. Queen e7 was played, with perhaps planning to castle queen side, recognizing that the king side is pretty much under fire right now. Bishop g5 was played. The knight would have been better here because it exerts more of a threat here onto this f7 square. But this bishop g5 is also not a bad move because obviously the knight here is pinned, and the queen is not going to get out. And if black wants to castle, then the pin is going to be even more long lasting, because as you can see here, both the queen and the rook are behind the knight. Of course, the problem with this move is that this isn't really that easily exploitable, outside of something like knight d5, because even if you play knight d5, worst case you can just trade it off, and then you don't have enough attackers to actually make use of this pin over here. Of course, white is still much better with a lot of space, a very exposed king, and better pawn structure and everything, but this isn't as great as white could have been, and not the outright winning, I'd say. So bishop e7 was played, eventually finally developing and also defending this knight at the same time. Knight d5 is played, trying to take advantage of this pin over here. Bishop takes d5, recognizing that this bishop is not doing anything at all. It won't. It's just facing this break of a pawn structure. So white decides to just trade it off. But now you can see after bishop takes and castles, this is very weak, very weak. You can see almost all of black's pawns are black's pawns on the queen side are all on dark squares. And you can see that white has a light square which will take advantage of it. All the pawns on the queen side are all on light squares, and white has a dark square which will take advantage of it. So white is definitely to be favored here, especially with the bishop pair exerting so much dominance over here. The queen can get into the attack very soon. Maybe something like here. This would be an idea. So f takes g, f takes g6 now, h takes g6, trying to get some counterplay here, capturing to the center, perhaps saying that maybe the h file will be enough to get some counterplay. Knight e1 is played, unleashing this rook over here. However, this isn't really that accurate because white should recognize that all of black's pieces are on the pretty much are on the king side now, and black is trying to play on the king side. So now white should recognize white's advantage on the queen side and try to attack on the queen side with the pieces, which is a bit easier to see, or with pawns, with something like c3, d4, a bit more positional and perhaps harder to see for players of around their strength, because when your opponent tries to attack on the flank, you want to counter in the center. So something like c3, d4 will be very strong. So instead knight e1 was played. Now this knight is a bit passive. It's going to be hard to develop this knight back. Although this rook does exert pressure over here on the f file, and there is a lot of pressure here on the f7 square, we can see that this isn't really anything serious because there's just too many defenders on this knight here, and this pawn is not getting there anytime soon. So bishop h6 was played, trying to trade off material, trying to get white to help black to double rooks up. So for example, if bishop takes and rook takes here, then you can see that black is ready to double up here on the h file. But instead, white sees this and doesn't want to allow black this opportunity, which is why white plays queen d2 here. However, the unfortunate thing about this move is that after bishop takes, queen takes, now this queen here is a bit misplaced, because as I mentioned earlier, the queen wants to be exerting pressure here on the queen side. However, by playing queen takes g5, give me a moment. So by playing queen takes g5 over here, white is pretty much conceding all the activity that white can have over the queen side. So this bishop doesn't really do anything now because the pieces can't actually access this f7 square, and if white doesn't want to play on the queen side, then having a great piece on the queen side doesn't mean anything because white simply isn't focusing and making use of it. So now if this queen wants to go back over to the queen side, too many moves need to be spent. You go back here to d3, d2 sorry, and d2, c3, and back to a3 over here. So it takes a lot of moves. Meanwhile, black's pieces are flooding over on the king side, and now the king might be starting to get a little bit exposed. So here, rook h5 is played. So developing and trying to double up rooks with tempo. Queen e3 was played. This is a bit inaccurate again because this square doesn't really do anything. The queen is sort of centralized, it's sort of opposing this queen, but it can't really go anywhere, it can't really do anything. So perhaps a better idea would be to go to queen to d2 for the same idea again, or maybe even queen g3 to help out the defense, because now the time is sort of already over for white. White is a bit on the back foot now. The pieces were much weaker than it used to be, and now black is going to get a lot of activity. So maybe queen g3, getting ready for rook d h8, preparing for this situation here. Maybe something h3, and we can see this position being played perhaps. So here actually there's even a tactic from black. Let's see how does it go. Yeah, there's a positional sacrifice over here. So in this position, we mentioned how white's pieces are sort of exerting pressure on the f7 square, but not really, and all the pieces are getting ready to attack here on the king side. And the knight isn't really doing much. The rooks are disconnected, and the rook pair, the rook battery is very strong here. So here, actually, there's a positional sacrifice. In this position, black can play knight takes d5. And after d takes e5, giving the queen more squares and potentially swinging over to the king side, uh, something like either knight f6 or f5 can be played. No, wait. Knight takes d5, sorry, my bad. Knight takes d5, e takes d5, and now f5. Okay, now this looks a lot more stronger, sorry, my bad. The previous move just hangs the knight. So here in this variation, all of the weaknesses from black are actually staunched, because you can see there's no good way to take advantage of the light square weaknesses because of this pawn over here blocking the way. You can't really capture your own pawns, so this pawn is now sort of shielding black from any danger, and now you have this very strong pawn mass incoming. So moves like knight f6 first, I think, getting the pieces active, and then moves like g5, g5, g4 maybe. Yeah, knight f6 followed by g5, g4 seems to be very strong. Open things up, open files up, and make use of this vision here, the queen and the king here on the same file. So maybe that's something to look at. But in the game, queen g3 or queen d2 all one play. Instead, queen e3 was played, sort of centralizing. Oh, hello. Hello, Lao. So instead, queen e3 is played. It looks nice, like it's in the center, but it doesn't really it can't really do anything, and it doesn't really go anywhere, so it's sort of an inaccuracy here, but white is really in a lot of trouble. Knight takes d5 here is played, it's still a good move. So now I expect the same idea to come true, where e takes d5 and f5 is played. So now this pawn mass is barreling towards the king side. The light square weaknesses around the king are sheltered by this d5 pawn. Moves, as mentioned earlier, moves like knight d5, g5, g4 might be coming. So here c4 was played. This doesn't really help white's case. Of course, it defends this pawn over here, but we don't really want to defend that pawn. We want that pawn to be gone if possible. We would even happily give it up for free if it meant having some potential activity there on the diagonal. But instead, by defending and committing to this rigid pawn structure, it just reduces white's counterplay on the queen side. So knight f6 is played, continuing through the plan. g5, g4 might be coming soon. Knight c2. Now going for this fork over here. Knight g4 is played, chasing away the queen, preparing to play something like g5. So now queen e2. Kind of asserting presence, kind of defending the pawn, but not really, for the same reason as to why queen e3 wasn't the greatest, because once again the queen doesn't really do well of defending the h pawn. It doesn't really move over to the queen side well, so not really a great move. And black is offered the pawn, so black captures it. Rook takes h2 was played. Now knight e3, trying to trade off pieces. When you're under attack, you want to trade off pieces, and perhaps activate this rook by, after trading here, you can maybe say that you're winning a pawn, at least your rook is active, something like that, trying to trade off the defender, take the rook maybe. But here it's actually a force made in 3 after rook h1 checks, giving up the rook. King takes his force, queen here, king runs, and this is checkmate. So this is a mate in 3, but fortunately for white, black didn't find it. Instead, black found a very similarly good idea. Queen h4 immediately, which is also force mate, because now the king cannot get out, and taking the knight doesn't really help because rook to h1 will be checkmate. So we can see g3 trying to attack the queen and create some squares for the king. But now after rook h1, of course we can just take. Taking is faster. It's going to be made very soon. Of course this is going to be made very soon. But rook h1 also works. Chasing the king up. This is the only square I can go to, and now queen h2 check again. There's only one square. King f3 is forced. e4 check. King h4, and now queen h6 checkmate. So very nice checkmate. Yeah, another 3 minute deficit. Yeah. So now disgruntled Prancer is saying c4 may help to facilitate knight c2, knight b4, knight c3, knight c3, but there's a slow plan like white. Yes, indeed. The knight came here from this very nice square here. It used to be a nice square on f3. It used to be good. It could have been even better here on g5, but this plan here of knight e1, playing c4, knight c2, knight b4, this is far too slow. So now Vadim is up 2-0. If I'm not wrong, Zephyr is a new account, so I don't think they're actually 1500. So don't be too surprised at the ratings and stuff like that. Rather queen on e1 instead. So Vadim is up 2-0, but our format is best of 4 to try and even out the black and white disparity. So yeah, we're going on to the next game, the third game in this match. So we can really see the result is sort of really spoiled. We know that Vadim won the match, but it's still a very interesting game nonetheless. We have another e4, another c6, another Caro-Kann, and this time Vadim goes for d4 instead of the previous Breyer variation, instead of d3 as he played in the first game. Now the main line d4 is played, d5, e5 we have the advanced variation, c5, and I'm sure Lau is very happy to see this, because this is the Botvinnik Cars variation. c3 was played, so sort of turning it into a good French for black. Knight c6, knight f3. Now the play is surrounding these two pawns over here. Bishop g4, trying to eliminate this knight over here. Yeah, this line is really getting more popular. It's super popular in this tournament as well. So trying to what do I call it? Yeah, get rid of the knight and take here. So here d takes c5 was played, saying that, you know what, you can take back, and then maybe I'll try to defend my pawns with something like b4 if you play e6. Okay, sorry, I just got a message from someone. Yeah, c3 is a very passive move. It just makes it justifies c5 in a sense. So e6 now is played. Nice to not give up the tension and just give up the pin and just capture. Instead, unleashing the bishop onto this pawn over here. b4 was indeed played, trying to hold on to this pawn over here. Bishop takes f3 now. Queen takes f3, and we see the idea here. Black wants to win this e5 pawn. Knight takes e5. Bishop b5 check. Knight d7. This is a bit of an inaccuracy. Perhaps c6 is a bit better. But knight d7 is not so great. I think because it sort of let me see. Perhaps some c5 ideas, c4 ideas. Because knight c6 definitely prevents any of that. It prevents this pressure here on the b7 square. If knight f7, I think eventually there might be some c4 ideas here. c4 is probably very strong. Either capturing and open things up in the center, or capturing here and winning the pawn over here. And you're also at the same time preventing this a6 b5 idea. Okay, maybe not immediately, but c4 at some point definitely seems very strong. So probably that is the reason why knight f7 is not so preferred. Knight c6 is probably better because now this c4 move isn't really as strong. Yeah. Okay. Knight d7 was played, and here knight d2 was played. So trying to develop here, I guess. But perhaps castling and playing c4 would probably be a more active and better way to take advantage of this knight here on f7. So knight d2 is fine. A5. This move I don't really like because you're giving up the possibility of shutting out the light square bishop. You're preventing yourself from playing a6 by playing a5 right away, and you aren't really applying enough pressure to win the pawns, I think, because the knight is still pinned. You can't really win the pawn over here. So here white castles, good move, getting out of the center, preparing potentially c4. Don't know if it will be played. Knight f6, but now c4. Now c4. The c4 still works as well. It's a bit locked slower. It's probably not as good anymore because now the knight also controls the d5 square. c4 is still possible even after knight c6 because white has pressure on c6. Yes, you're right. Of course, there is the threat of playing c4, and then let's say if d takes, for example, if c4, just for example, and d takes, of course you can still go for this and play here. This is much better for white, of course. But the thing is, here you don't really have to capture here. You can play knight f6 now, and then everything is fine. Everything is fine. Whereas here, and you play c4 maybe, and you play knight f6 here, this looks a lot more dangerous, because too many things are exposed. Feels a lot more vulnerable. But yeah, c4 is still a thematic move in this position. Set a5 was played, castles here, c4 now, but c4 is not that great now because it gives up a pawn and the knight now defends, and you don't have knight c3 to sort of apply more pressure here on the d5 square anymore. So it's a bit weak. A takes b4 was played, good move. Free pawn, just take it. C takes d5, but now knight takes d5. You don't have to take with the pawn anymore. So now the knight is shielding the influence over here on the light squares. Rook e1, nice move. You're threatening to capture the knight over here with the effect of this pin. So bishop e7, covering, preparing to castle, good move. c6 was played. Now pretty much forcing b takes c6, and after bishop takes c6, white is trying to insist that this bishop is very strong here, perhaps taking or maybe even leaving this pin. But here this isn't really as strong as it visually looks because of the rook c8. You can just chase the bishop out, and now after castling soon, black will be the one with the upper hand because black is of course up a pawn. Black is up a pawn. This pawn actually. So instead, rook a5 was played instead, sort of giving more protection to this knight over here, which is not a bad idea. It's not a bad idea. However, that allows for something like knight to c4, very active, perhaps jumping in very quickly. But instead of knight to c4, after which we can possibly see ideas of of the knight jumping in, getting a lot of control at the center. Maybe let's see. Takes here, like for example, the threat is to take queen takes, because you don't take the king, queen here, and then there's no way to defend f7. So knight c4 will be very strong, but all the while attacking the rook at the same time. This needs to be very strong. But instead, knight b3 was played, similar idea, trying to get the knight in with tempo. But of course, this b3 square isn't as active as the c4 square. And now rook a6, defending, retreating, and then now attacking, chasing this bishop away. Bishop takes d5, opening up the e file here. Queen takes. So now white has regained the pawn, and it feels like there is some pressure here. But black immediately just castles, having none of it. And now this is sort of an equal position now. Now both sides have very similar pawn structures. Black has a bit more space with this pawn here on b4, but it is at the same time also a kind of a weakness, because it's a bit overextended. There's only a bishop that can defend it right now, and it's going to take a few moves if white tries to throw everything at it. So bishop b2 is played. White, instead of going after this weak pawn over here, is trying to attack on the king side instead, still having the attacking blood in them. Bishop to f6, countering it right away. So bishop takes f6, knight takes f6, and now this is completely equal. Queen takes d8, queens are off the board now. h4, grabbing some space on the king side, perhaps planning to play something like king g3, king g2, get a very solid pawn structure before like piling everything up on this b pawn over here. So h6 is played, creating some air for the king. Rook e2, probably doubling up here, but defending the pawn here first. You don't want to just double up and give up your a2 pawn and make this a very advanced pass pawn. So rook a3. What's the idea here? Maybe the idea is that after rook a8, black wants to capture, but there is no reason to play rook a3 so soon. Maybe rook d to a8 first, then this is also a possibility, sort of tying down this rook, preventing this rook from going away first before doing that. It's probably slightly more accurate, but rook a3 of course is completely fine as well. It's just that now this rook is a bit more on an inactive square in case play goes elsewhere. For example, if rook ae1 is played, then the play might shift over to the center instead of the a file, and then this rook may be a bit misplaced. So rook e3 instead was played, recognizing sort of this ghost trend into the future and saying that, you know what, if you want to preemptively attack my knight, I'm going to preemptively defend my knight. Rook a d8 now, and this threat is very alive. And the tough thing is you can't really move the rook away to avoid because the rooks are attacking this a2 pawn, but at the same time you can't really move this rook away to defend this pawn because then this tactic will work out. So knight c1 here was played, defending, trying to trade off pieces and trying to weather the storm. But so it's sort of like a conceding that white is in the worst endgame because after trading, and of course this is the worst position. Like the knight is very passive, the rook is passive, this knight is active, this pawn is very advanced, and then white has like 3 pawn islands. So this would be a better endgame for black. Here or here, you know, can get active very quickly, apply a lot of pressure. But instead, rook a4 was played, just backing off, refusing to trade, maintaining pressure here on the a pawn. It's not a bad idea as well. Perhaps trying to get the knight in to apply maximum pressure here onto the a2 pawn. Rook b1 played now, trying to counter the pressure here. Since the pawn is defended by a lesser piece, white is sort of free to move the rook. Knight d5 is played, attacking the rook and executing the idea over here. Rook d3 attacking the knight. Knight c3, the plan as follows. Now the rook is attacked, the pawn is attacked. The rook goes to b3. What's the idea here? Can we just capture? Or just capture? Yeah, never mind. Because the pawn is given up, it's not enough activity. If both rooks were on the second rank, then maybe it'll be stronger. So I guess you can't really win the pawn because you'll be giving up this pawn. So rook b3, just getting out of the way. Rook knight takes a2 was played, knight takes a2, rook takes a2, rook takes b4, and now this is a completely drawn endgame. There isn't enough pressure to go by. Both sides are very solid. Both rooks are not on the 7th rank, on the second rank. So nothing crazy going on over here. They can just check each other forever. So rook a1 check, king h2, rook a1 a2, trying threatening his pawn. f3 was played. I don't really like that. That's a bit both are pretty much in bullet time. Yeah, both are pretty much in bullet time. f3 still not very natural because it's sort of making this g pawn more vulnerable, and this pawn structure isn't as solid. I rook to e2, trying to double up on the second rank. Nice idea. I rook to b7. White is trying to do the same, but oh, I didn't like that. Black should have been faster here. So this would have forced white to be on the back foot, because now there is no way to defend the pawn. It's still not tragic, but it's pretty bad. Um, so maybe after giving some checks, hiding, capturing this pawn in exchange for this pawn, and rook h3, this would be just a draw. Instead, rook a to e8 was played instead, now doubling up here, and this isn't as strong. It's very solid, of course, but it isn't as strong. So king h3, now planning to play something like maybe g3, or maybe even g4 h3, and get the king here, um, to rebuild a solid pawn structure. So king h7 getting out of the way, but unfortunately this gives up the pawn here on f7, which isn't spotted by white. White plays rook d to d7 anyway, so it's going to win the pawn anyway. You can defend here with rook f8, but you can still capture because there's two attackers. And although black is a pawn down, this is still completely equal. There's no real way to advance everything. There's no way to get a winning king pawn endgame over here. So here it's still pretty much very drawish. Black doesn't even try to defend the pawn, instead just retreats the rook. Rook takes f7 was played, so now white is up a rook here. Rook g6. Now defending this pawn. Rook b to e7. Okay, forcing a trade of rooks, inviting a trade of rooks. But time, I see. So Zephyr here only has 1 second left on the clock. Vadim has 22 seconds. So h5, g4, still very, very drawish position. And it was in this position that white won on time. So a bit unfortunate, both sides were very, very solid. No real tactics. And the game was pretty even throughout. But if this Vadim manages to take the match and win 3-0. So this is the first match that I wanted to show. The next game that I wanted to show is in chapter 34. It's, let me see, who is it? Zephyr versus Biruha. So I think all of the matches are from Zephyr. Yeah. Because although Zephyr didn't win all of them, like as we saw, Zephyr already lost the first match, but they played pretty well. There were plans, there were ideas, there weren't any obvious like just piece hangs. So I found their matches very interesting to look at, I guess. So that's why I selected all of the matches I selected are their games. So here you have e4, e5, king's pawn, knight c3, you have another Vienna, and here d6 again. For some reason, this is very popular around that level. A bit of a passive way of defending the pawn. Bishop c4 once again, taking use of this diagonal. Wait, is this the game that I looked at just now? No, the game I looked at just now is Rarity, never mind. Bishop c4, knight c6. So this is kind of transposing into a max lunge defense. sort of transposing to a max launch defense with this knight c3, knight c6 thing. d3, again, now you have a very symmetrical pawn structure. Now any advantage is pretty much gone. That's is pretty equal here. Bishop to e6, countering the bishop. Bishop takes, f takes. Now black gets the open fr in exchange for double pawns over here. So this is still fairly normal. Knight f3, queen f6. Queen f6, I prefer the square to be reserved for the knight over here, but perhaps black is trying to castle queenside, so that's why queen f6 here, maybe something like knight f6, accelerate development, something like that maybe. So queen f6, white just castles, h6, preventing any bishop g5 ideas. Bishop e3 just developing. b6 is a bit of a weird move, but I guess the idea is that after castling, black doesn't want to hang the h7 pawn. Although a worthy thing to note is that even if black castles here, the a7 pawn is not hanging because the knight is defending it. So here after bishop e3, b6 was played for some reason. Bishop knight d2. White is preparing for black to castle queenside and sort of preparing to maneuver the pieces over to the queenside already. Knight d4 was played. This feels off because black has been spending a lot of time. Playing moves like b6, a6, knight d4 here. With all of this, looks very suspicious. This doesn't do much because you can always defend or even block here. Maybe f4, try and destabilize this knight, take advantage of the rook here on the f file, open things up maybe. Looks nice. So if let's say just castles now, then you can just capture here. Queen has to move. If let's say queen captures, then now this comes with tempo. Then where can the queen go? Where can the queen go? Queen can go here, but this looks very dangerous. This looks very dangerous. Is there a way to take advantage of it? Attack the knight. Does this work? No, this doesn't work because knight takes a check. You lose the maybe just attack the queen. Queen here, corral the queen in. Rook. Maybe. Oh no, wait, what? Can just capture here. Now the knight is defended. But d5 attacks, chases the anyway. Okay, you can gain a tempo here. So you can save your bishop. Then how many squares does the queen have? It's taken, this is taken, this is taken. Is this the only square? This is taken. This is taken. So this is the only move. No, here, these two moves. So these two squares are left. Maybe queen here. Is there a way to trap the queen? Can I sack here? This is a fork. I mean, of course, if I take, then of course this is absolutely winning. But black doesn't have to take, alright? Black doesn't have to take. If take once, then you can't take once. You can't even take once. So at night here, try to get rid of the knights. And then I guess you just keep winning pawns. You just keep winning pawns. So I guess it's no real way to trap the queen, but it's still very strong. Yeah. So f4 probably is the best move, maybe. Um, Definitely looks like a very strong move here, especially if with black just castles. So instead, bishop takes d4 as played is also fine. After e takes hello, like so after e takes d4, now this can be played. Which was played actually. Knight b5 was played. Castles, so getting out of the fork. But this hangs a pawn over here. Knight takes a7 was indeed played. Okay, nice. If here, then you get a fork, so you have to be careful. King b7 preventing this idea. But simply you can just retreat. Simply just retreat. Yeah, knight b5 was played. Rook a8, trying to move pieces over to the queen side to slow down the attack. Knight f3 was played. Knight f3 is fine. I would expect something like knight c4 maybe. Bit more active, but of course this comes with the idea of winning this pawn, which is of course very solid as well. Here e5 has to be played to hold on to the pawn, but instead rook a5 was played, sort of provoking white to capture the pawn, which white does. Knight b takes d4, which is very nice. Now e5 is a bit too late, because now knight b3 can be played with tempo. Rook to a6, and this knight, so this rook is a bit awkward. There's still a lot of moves if black wants to even double up. You can see this bishop here is in the way. This knight here has nowhere to develop, and yeah, even the bishop is so sad over here. So this queen f6 move is hurting even well into the middle game. So instead knight fd2 was played. Okay, now after winning the pawn, the knight has done its job here on the f file. So now it's moving over to c4 square and trying to attack here instead. And g5 was played, so lashing out on the king side, creating more squares to develop the black pieces. g3 was played, a bit unnecessary, not really required there. Perhaps just getting ready to play, maybe breaking in the center, would have been a bit more proactive. But knight e7 here was played, so developing pieces. Knight c1, interesting. Where is this knight going? It can't really do anything here, but I guess the idea is to come rotate this way instead. But as you can see from that there's a rule in chess called the rule of three moves, where maneuvers and positional plans are often in time if they can be done within three moves. And you can see this maneuver is a bit too long. You see one move, two move, three move, four move. It takes four moves to get the knight to an ideal square, and it isn't even really prepared to do that yet. You have to do even more things to prepare that. Maybe even like here, then maybe you might even have to play c4 first if you really want to get your knight in. So this maneuver is a bit too slow. But it's okay. White is still in the driver's seat over here because these pieces are taking forever to develop. So knight c1 is fine. h5, still trying to take advantage of this g3 push, the hook, and try to open things up on the king side. Knight e2 was played. So proceeding with the maneuver. Knight to c6. Now knight wants to come here to d4, try and plug things up. Knight c4 was played. b5, kicking a knight away. Knight goes back to e3, and now the knight is ready to go sit into the outpost. If things get a bit spicy, a bit hairy, knight to f5 can always be played to sort of clamp down on this nice outpost. If things are going well, you want to attack, you always play knight d5 with tempo, apply pressure here on the king side, the queen side. h4 was played to open things up. And here queen e2 was played, which is a blunder because it's a bit slow, and maybe something like c3 or c4, open things up with the pawns who have been a lot more proactive. Maybe even a4, open things up there. Maybe even close things up here with g4 would have been even bit better to like, for example, this halts black's progress, this advances white's plan, this advances white's plan, this advances white's plan, but queen d2 is a bit like, of course it collects the rooks, but um, it doesn't really advance white's plan quick enough, I guess. So bishop h6 was played, lining this up, nice way to develop. G4 was played now, preventing any G4 from black, so good recognition. H3, trying to prevent white from playing H3 themselves and limiting the squares wherein the king can move. Interesting idea. But this also allows this, so knight f5 was played, sitting the knight into the very nice square. I think, yeah, it's pretty good. Okay, so knight d4, trying to trade it off. But white can either trade off to prevent this trade from happening, or even play knight g3 to reinforce. So white chooses to play knight e takes d4. After e takes d4, now this pawn is very weak. You can win it immediately, or you can try to develop your queen first to attack both pawns. So you can win it this way, or you can win it this way. Instead, white decides to play c3, which is also not bad. You're not really winning the pawn this way. Oh, my bad, sorry. You can't capture now because of queen here. So queen b4 is probably the better way to go. I just realized the queen is defending the pawn. So queen b4 double attack would have been a nice way. And you have to defend this pawn somehow, maybe here. Then you can choose to win the pawn, or you can choose to maybe play a4 or something to open things up and attack the king side. Both are fine. Instead, c3 was played, which is still a nice move, opening up the files. Rook f8, trying to apply more pressure to the f file, but isn't really the best tries because the knight cannot be kicked out. Black only has a dark square bishop, and the queen is in front of the rook, so black can't even exchange sack here in this position. So c takes d4. White wants to open up the position. Queen e6, so giving up another pawn. So now white is 3 pawns ahead. This nice pawn mass in the center and this open file to work with very soon. b3 was played, just recognizing this threat over here from black to try and win the a2 pawn. Rook takes f5. Black recognizes that this knight here is simply too strong and decides to just give up the exchange. E takes f5 was played. G takes f5 is probably a bit stronger because there is no real threat anymore from g4. The queen can just go away and apply pressure. So capturing towards the center and creating this super heavy ball of pawns would have been an alternative try. Instead, e takes f5 is not bad as well, keeping things close on the king side, opening up files, but this of course also sort of makes the double pawns here in the center a bit more weak, susceptible to attack. Queen d5 tries to take advantage of it immediately, attacking both of the weak pawns here, and also threatening checkmate in one. So f3 was played, recognizing the mate threat, giving up this pawn over here. Queen takes d4 with check, king h1, bishop g7. Not really threatening to take, but you see what happens. Maybe trying to reroute here, get the bishop in and infiltrate on the dark squares. Rook a to c1. The queen is defending the pawn over here, so the a rook is free to go to the c file. Yeah, it's okay. Rook a to c1, queen d5, going back, applying pressure here onto this pawn, preventing this rook from moving. Queen c2, applying a lot of pressure here onto the c7 pawn. Rook c6. Rook c6. Rook c6 was played. So attacking the queen, trying to trade pieces. Hmm. Yeah, it's not suffering from time. You can see that even now, Zephyr is 5 minutes back, 5 minutes down the clock. But they're playing good moves. They're playing good moves. Even here, White is completely winning. Engine wants to just sack the queen. Not really sack because you have to give it up anyway. So trade everything down, and now you are up 2 pawns, up and a rook. So this is very nice, which is indeed what Zephyr finds. So good on them. Rook c1 right away. So gaining tempo, trying to get the rook active. King b6, maintaining defense over this pawn over here. King g1 getting the king active, perhaps trying to win this pawn over here. It cannot be defended in any way. Bishop d4 check, preventing this maneuver. So king f1 instead, getting a king over to the center. Bishop e3, trying to get the bishop in. Maybe parking this bishop here on f4, preventing the king from ever getting in to capture this pawn. So rook c2. Yep, bishop f4, a4, just trading pawns. And here, if the king ever tries to win this pawn, the rook will win this pawn and capture this pawn at the same time. So as I mentioned earlier, I mentioned previously in previous streams, trading for black is not really possible. 4 points up for white. Yeah, but it's kind of in dire straits anyway. So it's hard to find a move. And as mentioned previously before, if you're up material, then trading is of course always in trading and endgame is always beneficial, pretty much always beneficial, because you're going to capture things faster, you're going to be better at capturing things, and after everything is captured, you are going to be the one with things left. So trading things, of course, white will be very happy to do that. So this exchange here on a4, we have d4 now, trying to break up the pawn structure maybe. d5 was played to prevent any further advancement, but now this pawn is going to be a permanent weakness. Black does have presence of mind of fixing this pawn on the dark square, however, so that is good on them. Rook e2 now activating this way instead, trying to pick up all the pawns. King a5. Now rook back to c2, saying that if you capture, I capture. I'm happy with trading. King takes, rook takes, bishop takes h2. Now the only thing that white has to be careful of is to be careful not to let this pawn become a queen, obviously. So rook h6, winning the pawn immediately. There's no way to defend it. Bishop retreats back to a defended square, rook takes h3. So now all of black's troubles are over. And even though white only has 54 seconds left and black has 6 minutes on the clock, white is still completely in control. So we'll go very quickly. King b4, rook h7, king c7, king c4 attacking this pawn. Rook d7 attacking this pawn. King can still capture. King e2 getting active. King c4, king d1, d4, f6. Trying to defend, but now this gives up control, allows the king to step up further. Bishop f8, rook a7, trying to go here maybe, or maybe trying to just check and win the pawn. Since this pawn is untouchable by the bishop anyway. d3. Perhaps maybe here right away would have been faster, or maybe even here just to win the pawn. But of course rook a5 is still completely winning. Bishop e7. Now the bishop doesn't really have to stay there. Black wants to waste moves. Rook f5. Now I'm preparing to queen, but oh no. I was expecting back bishop f8 because black saw the idea previously, but instead now black plays king d4 instead. Interesting. Perhaps maybe because black didn't want to give up this pawn. But at this point, giving up another pawn compared to giving up a bishop You have to choose the lesser of two evils, the two poisons, lesser of two evils. Pick your poison. Yeah, mix up the sayings. Okay, f8 equals queen. White wins the bishop. King e5 wins another pawn. Wins this pawn, and yeah, mate very soon. Okay. So overall, this was a pretty good showing from Zephyr. And to finish it off, I'm going to end with the Zephyr versus Cole match. Also another very close match. Let me see. This game lasted. This match lasted for 4 games, so there was a back and forth here. Here, yep, the Cole versus Zephyr. So again, both are roughly the same rated. We'll see what happens. Here we have D4, the first time for Group D. Feel very fitting for Group D. C5, we have a Benoni defense. However, it's normal to not expect like 1,300, 1,500 people players to know how to play a Benoni. It's a very advanced opening after all. Here we see D takes C5, which sort of helps black because now after E6, black is very comfortable here. I have 3 developing, bishop takes C5. So now black is very happy because black has successfully traded a flank pawn for a center pawn without any loss of development. So E3 is played, preparing to develop the bishops. Like C6, C3, going for some sort of London setup maybe. D5 was played, grabbing space. Bishop B5, pinning the knight. Bishop D7, knight D4, trying to apply a lot of pressure here into this pin piece, but everything is actually completely fine. Everything is completely fine. You can even capture if you want. So Queen B6 was played to sort of defend everything, apply more pressure here, apply pressure here. It's just an okay, nice move. So white castles, but unfortunately, no, it's fine. Never mind. This isn't really a concern because you can always capture first. Yeah, so removing the defender doesn't really mean that the bishop is given up, so that's fine. So instead, black just played knight g to e7, a bit passively developing the knight. Maybe knight to f6, of course, is more what's it called? More active because it's fighting for the center. But knight g to e7 is of course very understandable. There's a lot of pressure here on c6, and black just wants to make all the pieces control that square. So b4 was played, sort of chasing the bishop. Bishop takes d4 was played, good move. Bishop takes c6, good for white to spot it, not blundering a piece. Here knight takes c6 was played. Knight takes c6. Knight takes c6. Maybe bishop takes c6 would be better, a bit more active, because the bishop will be very sad here if knight takes. For example, in the game, if knight takes, then this bishop is very sad. However, if bishop takes, then you can always develop the knight to f5. Anyway, so this probably would have been a nicer way of recapturing. Of course, knight takes c6 is not a blunder or anything. E takes d4. Not giving up this pawn, because although you would like to capture towards the center, however that would give up the b4 pawn. So instead, e takes d4 was played. Rook c8, taking advantage of this weakness here. Queen g4, trying to attack, but this is also a bit risky because it puts the queen in the line of the bishop, and the pawn can actually be very easily defended by castling or even king f8. Zephyr plays very well here. They found king f8, which is not something I would expect. I would not expect black time. Simply saying that, I can play h5. I'm going to make use of the h file, so I don't want to put my king on the flank. This pawn structure is very solid. There is no e pawn left for white to exploit it, and I'm going to focus either on the king side of playing h5, or I'm going to sort of take advantage of this upward development, this lack of development and upward pawn structure on the queen side. So good recognition from black. Rook e1 was played, just centralizing rooks. However, here I think this would be a very good chance for um, white to try and create some squares on the queen side, maybe something like a4 to try and develop the pieces. But instead rook e1 was played, it's fine as well. Queen c7, maybe trying to exert more pressure here on the king side, but also applying a lot of pressure here onto this c pawn. Black really has to find a way to develop the pieces quickly, or else if once this c pawn is under fire, this knight might never be able to move. So rook e3 is played. White's solution to this c pawn problem is to defend it with the knight. Now the knight is free to defend the pawn with the rook. Now the knight is free to move. e5 was played, opening things up a bit. E5 was played, unleashing this attack on the queen here. Queen g5. This allows h6 to kick the queen away, but h6 wasn't played. Instead, f6 was chosen. Perhaps thinking that this is a more solid structure, perhaps. But this is a bit slightly inferior, I think. After queen h5, now the queen actually is looking at something. It's actually doing something. Oh, there's an interesting tactic over here. Knight takes d4. You can't really capture back because it's made in 3 here. So this is a very nice tactic that was in the position, which again goes to show why defending with the rook might not have been the best idea, and trying to develop the knight and the bishop very quickly to defend the pawn might have been an urgent task for that white had to complete early on in the game. And now with the awkwardness, you can see this showing through tactics like knight takes d4. Let's say knight takes d4. Is there anything white can actually do? The threat here is to fork, win the rook. So you can't not capture. But at the same time, you can't capture because that's made in 3. So you have to defend this square. You can't defend with the queen because the knight covers that square. So knight a3 is probably forced. But now that the knight is not covering the c pawn, you can play knight f5, kicking away the rook to d3. You have to try and maintain control over this pawn over here. You can play e4, kick the knight away, the rook away. This is the only square left. This is the only square left. Maybe knight d6, opening up this attack here, opening this, preparing to capture here. So the rook is now forced to leave. Rook is now forced to leave somewhere. Oh no, rook can go back though. Rook can go back. Rook can go back. I'm fortunate that there's no this attacking the queen move. How can I take advantage of this? I'll just check the engine. Maybe. Wow. Engine wants G5? Is it for real? G5, Bishop E3. You can't capture because of this discovery. And Knight G7. Oh. I mean, I guess it makes sense. I guess it makes sense. I mean, like I mentioned earlier, I wanted to play this knight G. It said like there's no knight G7 to attack the queen and unleash on the rook. So the engine just plays G5 to enable this. So brave, opening up things. The king looks so naked over here, but engine is fearless. Okay, but instead that wasn't played. Instead, bishop e8 was played, also a good move. Kicking the queen out, perhaps remaneuvering the bishop over here to g6. Queen f5 was played, which helps bishop g6. Bishop g6 now. Queen to e6, trying to infiltrate. But I think this just gives out the pawn, right, with tempo. Like, for example, of course, knight takes is still available, like still mate in two. But given that it's a very hard tactic to find, I think even capturing here, winning the pawn is still very strong. Attacking the queen, there are no checkmate threats or anything. Um, Queen has to move. Maybe if queen captures, then you can fork. And there's no good way to do much about it. In fact, if you are worried, you can even capture here. No capture there. If you capture that, then there's no more fork. I mean, you just takes. Yeah, this looks very strong already. Oh, and there's this threat as well. You can't even capture the pawn because this is mate. I forgot. So here, knight c3 maybe. Knight c3 defending. Then you fork. Something like that maybe. Okay. Instead the pawn wasn't found. The free pawn wasn't found. Instead rook d8 was played, giving up a bit of the giving up a bit of pressure. Perhaps foreseeing that perhaps that white wants to capture here, and maybe the d file will be a good place for the rook to be. But then this makes this king f8 move very awkward because now the king is trapped, sort of hugged by this queen, and the rook can't easily get into play now. So rook g3 was played for whatever reason, no idea why. But rook d6 was played, chasing the queen out. Queen h3. Now the idea is clear. So the reason why white wanted to play rook g3 was to threaten to check to take the bishop here, to win the bishop here, because if capture back you can take the rook with check. So king g8 was played, defending the rook. Bishop h6, sort of a sneaky way of saying, you know what, if you take, then I'm going to unleash nasty things over here on the g file. But black called white's bluff and just took it. It's completely fine to take it. Queen takes h6, still not threatening anything special because everything is defended nicely. There's no checkmate threats anywhere. But even queen g7 for good measure. Queen g7 for good measure, neutralizing everything. Now queen takes, king takes, and now of course black is completely fine. Yeah, black is completely fine. This takes too long. The black king can just step away. So there's no need to worry about that. So knight a3, finally developing the knight. Perhaps coming here, attack the rook and the pawn. E takes d4 now, black sees the free pawn. But again, we see a problem here. The call has 2 minutes and Zephyr has only 50 seconds on the clock. Black is in an overwhelmingly fantastic position here, up a bishop. But as you can see from the results, white still won. So I wonder if it's another time trouble thing. So rook d1. Knight e2 check even, finding this nice fork. King f1 takes. Oh, even taking away from the center. This is not so great. You want to capture towards the center. So f6 g3, rook e8 taking control over the open file. Rook e1 trying to contest, just captures your up material you like to trade. d4, pass pawns must be pushed. Knight c4 trying to sort of move the knight towards the center with tempo, gain some control over the pawn over here. Rook to d7, just take a step back. King d2, standing in front of the pawn. d3, put the pawn onto a light square. It can never be won because the bishop can always defend it. Knight e3, trying to reroute. Perhaps like this to try and win the pawn. King f7, getting the king into the game. Knight g4, proceeding with the plan. King e6, knight h6 instead. Interesting. I thought trying to win the pawn, although white can never win the pawn with not enough pieces. But knight h6, I wonder what the idea is. King e5, knight g4 check, attacking both the king and the pawn. King e4, giving the pawn out with check, and it's even a fork. Blunder here from Zephyr, under time control, under time trouble. Of course, now the Cole is also with 50 seconds on the clock. Now it's a bullet game for sure. Cole manages to find the tactic. Knight takes f6 with check. It's a fork. So now they are pretty much even material again. King d4, knight takes, and now white is the one up a pawn. Although black is the one with a pass pawn. This extra double pawn isn't really that significant yet. h6 was played, just trying to find something to do. Knight back, pushing pawns, attacking this pawn over here. Oh no, black is losing sight of all of the pawns. Actually, there's even a fork over here. But fortunately for black, white didn't spot it. Instead, white played a3 because it's a bullet game after all. It's hard to blame. Just defending your pawns. Bishop to h7, removing this threat, but still hanging the pawn over here, which white now sees. Knight takes h6, king b3, trying to win the pawns. Knight g4, this pawn is now hanging as well. King takes h3, h4 was played, trying to push past pawns. King takes b4. Now black has 3 pass pawns. White also has 3 pass pawns. This is very dangerous for both sides now. Knight f6 was played, going after the bishop. Bishop to g6, and now the pawns are rolling. h5 was played. Maybe here a5 would have been a better move, claiming that if you dare to take my bishop, you're not in time. So if you take, you can't really get back in time. I'm going to queen. Oops. Oh wait, no, you can come back. So if captures here, you need to gain opposition. Gain opposition, and now if you try to push, or if you try to get your knight back, you can get here in time. Here, check, check. Yeah, there's no way to stop the queen, stop back from queening. So probably that would a5 would have been an opportunity there instead of g6, because now after bishop g6, now white is the one who manages to push the pawns with tempo now. So h5, bishop has to move again, and now white is too quick to queen. So g4, even a bit unnecessary. Bishop e4 now, targeting this pawn. Knight takes e4, just bringing back the knight. And now king takes d3, not even pushing the pawn. a4, push the pawns, come back to get ready to sacrifice the knight. Even bringing a queen to the game if you capture here, which was played. Queen, whoa, not even capturing back with check. Capturing back with check is even more accurate. After king somewhere, anywhere, maybe you want up here because you want to go down, then you can even just mate in 1. Yeah, king can't move, mate next move. Yep, so this here we made in 3. So capturing back will be more natural, but instead queen g8 was played, which is still fine. maintaining control over this a2 square here. So after king b2, queen f8, targeting the pawn. This is getting a bit spicy. a2 now, very dangerous. But queen b8 check was found. And it was in this position that white won on time. So both of them incredibly low on time. 0.1 seconds for Zephyr in the final before the final move, and 8 seconds for Cole. You can see here this is a very very close match. Both players around the same level, good tactics, maybe some positional misunderstandings, but this is normal for players around this level. Nevertheless, very educational, very competitive. And let's head over to the next game. I'm just going to grab some water really quick. Alright, I'm back with more water. Sorry about that. Alright. Okay, so here in the second game we have e4 now. e4, e5, knight c3, another Vienna game. Knight c6, we have the max lunge defense. Bishop c4, developing the bishop to active square. d6, d3 again, you have a very symmetrical pawn structure. It feels like this opening it seems to be very easily reachable if you're white and you play the Vienna. Knight ge7, f4, okay, e takes f4, bishop takes f4, f5. So this is kind of like a Vienna gambit, kind of. F5 now, black tries to do the same, but it's a bit inaccurate here. It doesn't work as well because you don't have black doesn't have the same activity as white has. For example, black is already the second to move, and also black chose to develop very awkwardly with knight to e7, like a bit more slowly, I would say, and block the bishop here. It's going to be hard to castle. So opening up the flank here isn't really advisable. Whereas white can simply go knight f3 and castle very quickly and make advantage of the f-file. So queen to h5 check, trying to take advantage of this immediately. However, this doesn't work because g6 can simply just kick the queen away, queen back to all the way back to d1. Maybe queen to h4 would have been a nicer try. I know it looks a bit scary here, but the idea is that maybe you want to get your knight in, control the square, and sort of maybe infiltrate possibly. Maybe something like queen to f6 even, if allowed. So instead, queen all the way back to d1, which means this queen h5 move was a little bit unnecessary. Well, it did provoke g5, g6, but the g6 isn't really a bad move. Instead, it helps black to develop here and turn into some sort of Leningrad Dutch kind of. Not Leningrad, is it Leningrad? I think so. Yeah, Leningrad Dutch. It is some sort of Leningrad Dutch. So d5 was played, trying to stake a claim in the center. That was the purpose of developing a knight here. Knight takes d5. Yeah, it's okay. Knight takes d5 is fine. So knight takes, bishop takes. Bishop takes here is a bit inaccurate. Instead, maybe forcing uh, the knight to move away, something like this, might have been a lot stronger. Something like this might have been stronger. But instead, bishop takes, it kind of still keeps things a bit closed, and white isn't really taking advantage of the fact that black is behind in development and the king side is very open. So f takes e4 now, bishop takes, good move, trying to keep the pawn structure, planning to castle very soon. Queen h4 check, but bishop g3 just backing off, attacking the queen, queen f6. Now knife 3 hopefully, no, c3 first. So defending this pawn, by obstructing the queen, bishop to f5, trying to trade off pieces, and now knight f3, right? Yes, okay, knight f3, good. So white wants to castle soon and take advantage of this king in the center. Black tries to get out of jail for free by playing castles. However, that doesn't really work because that runs into a pin, which was found by Zephyr. So good find from Zephyr, playing bishop to h4 and now winning the exchange. Knight d4, gaining tempo, try to win the pawn. Queen f6, maintaining defense over the bishop. And Zephyr can just simply trade off everything by force even with check. And this would have been very nice, like this, win the pawn this way. But instead Queen f3 was played, which is also a very nice move, um, pinning the bishop to the queen this time. Queen h4 check was found, good move. g3 with tempo, chasing the queen somewhere. Now this queen to g4 was nice try, saying that, you know what, if you want to capture, you trade, and then now you are no longer winning my pawn. You are no longer winning my pawn. However, Zephyr spots that the bishop is the important one here. So, and it comes with check. So bishop f5 check was found, which is very nice. And after g takes f5, queen takes f5, queen takes f5, knight takes f5. So now Zephyr is not only up the exchange but it's up 2 pawns. So very nice find. Bishop to c5 was played, and here there's a chance to play d4 to shut out the dark square bishop. But instead, king to d2 was played. Not a bad move, getting the king more active into the center, connecting rooks. Rook to f8, attacking the knight. d4 now, saying if you want to trade, I can trade, I don't mind. So black tries to win back material slowly by capturing and now winning back a pawn, but white is still up a pawn and up the exchange. Rook a1, moving rooks to open files. Rook f5, trying to contest the other open file. Rook h to f1, not allowing black to even take control of that file. So knight rook d5 check, now taking control of the d file. Rook king c2, hiding away. Knight c2, perhaps maybe some cheeky ideas in the future. Rook f7, putting the rook on the 7th rank, attacking this pawn over here. b6, giving the king some air, but losing the h-pawn. So rook takes h7, 3 pawns will be taken. Rook h5, now occupying the file that the rook was previously occupying, good try. And there is no rook e7 because this knight controls the square. So, but still there is rook h8 maybe. Rook e8 was rook e8, sorry, not rook h8. Rook e8 check was indeed played. King b7 only move, pretty much. You don't want to play knight here because you can apply a lot of pressure, and after something like this, you can just push your pawns all the way to victory. So we wouldn't want that. So instead, king b7, getting the king up. This is what you play b6 for. And now rook g8 was played. So now supporting the pawns but also preparing to double up and attack the c pawn. So rook f2 check was played. King b3, defending everything, free from all checks. Not this check perhaps, which was played. Knight a5 check. And here, simply king e3 should have been played. Sidestepping, still protecting all the weaknesses, and now there are no real checks to be played. You can play here, but now only you play king b4 because if you check, I can win your knight. But playing here is different because after rook takes, the king is under check, and there are only two squares to move to. Only two squares to move to, and now you can't capture this knight because the knight is defended by the pawn. And after, let's say, if king a3, this is actually made in two. After here, here, and here. No, sorry. b5. My bad. The mating pattern was not quite there. Not very technically aware actually. b5 is the mate. Yeah. So king a4 has to be played here, and then you can capture this pawn as well. You still can't go up because of pawn checks. So you have to go king b4, and you can still check again, and then you have to run somewhere. Now you can unravel, defend the rook, and the king can approach. So this position here will actually be in black's favor, because although white has two connected pass pawns, the king is very limited squares, and white has to give up rooks soon to prevent checkmate. So instead, king a3 was played, king b4 check, king a3 was played, and this actually made in two. Knight c4 check was found in king a4 forced, and unfortunately, instead of b5 checkmate, black played the move that I found. Rook takes a2 check, but this allows king b3 attacking both the rook and the knight, and now white is winning again. So rook a5, trying to at least save the rook. King takes c4. Now black doesn't have anything anymore. Rook c5 check, getting out of checks, winning the pawn, and it was here that white won by checkmate. So again, Zephyr lower on time, 2 minutes versus 3 minutes, but a lot better positional understanding shown in this game. A bit of some opening mistakes showcased by black, a bit too slow, and black suffered for it. So here in the third game, we have d4 again, fortunately. So we have a d4 opening in the group D match. c5 again, a Benoni. Knight f3 this time, defending the pawn instead of taking. So it's a good recognition from Cole, seeing that previously when I captured, black had a very nice time recapturing back and developing and all that stuff. So this time I'm going to defend instead. This time I'm going to be the one developing. I don't want to give black this bishop takes c5 move. So g6 is played now. Black saw that you're not going to give me bishop takes c5. Now I'll develop my bishop this way instead. Bishop f4 was played, which makes bishop g7 even stronger. Now this diagonal is very weak, and white has to be very careful. So white plays e3, not having any of it. Knight c6, c3, again going for this sort of London structure. Queen b6, now taking advantage of the fact that the bishop is out of the pawn chain and this pawn is weak. So queen b3 was played, a bit of a mistake here, maybe going for knight a3, and this tricky idea might have been a bit more tricky because this bishop also controls this c7 square. If black is not careful, maybe black might lose their queen or maybe get forked, something like that. And queen b3 in this position isn't really called for. It's not really called for in this position. d6 was played, which is a fine move, just keeping things solid. Knight b to d2. Nobody wants to capture the queen to open up the a file, so just develop the knight. Bishop to e6, now attacking the queen here. Nice developing move with tempo. d5 was played, seemingly looking like a fork. However, Zephyr managed to realize that this wasn't really a proper threat, because you can always remove the defender over the d5 pawn by trading queens, and you don't have time to capture anything because it's the queen. You have to recapture back the queen. So a takes b3 and bishop takes d5, and with that black managed to win the pawn and have a more active position here. e4 was played, trying to kick the bishop back to e6, bishop c4, maybe trying to disrupt black's pawn structure, but simply bishop takes c4, and this pawn structure isn't anywhere better. This knight doesn't really have anywhere to go as well. Knight to f6 was played, continuing to develop, putting pressure here. The pawn cannot be pushed because there's sufficient control over the e5 square. So instead, knight f to d2, defending this pawn over here. Black decides to castle, white castles. Now both are out of danger from the center. So b5 is now played, kicking the knight away, recognizing that the knight doesn't really have many good squares to go to. In fact, there is only one square to go to. Knight to e3 here is probably the way to go. No, actually it's not really that bad, much better. There's the rook defense here, so never mind. Knight a5, and now a trade of knights. Here, maybe rook f to b8, and black can try to claim superiority. Like white's pieces are more inactive. The bishop is staring into a pawn chain. The knight is more active. The bishop can soon exert dominance over the pawns, and then you're preparing to play something like e5, maybe d5, maybe c4, maybe push the pawns, something like that in the future to unleash this rook over here. So maybe rook f to b8 might be a nice move. Instead, b4 was played, which is a nice idea. The fact, trying to say that, you know what, if you take, this is triple pawns now, triple pawns, and after capturing back, now if I can still play rook f8, or I can even play rook c8 and try to take control over it and infiltrate this way instead. Right, instead, knight h5 was, the pawn wasn't captured. White didn't want to triple their pawns, so white played rook f to a1, trying to double up and put more control over here. Knight f5 was played. This comes with tempo. Rook takes a7, rook takes a7, rook takes a7. Now this pawn is under attack, but this bishop is still under attack. So bishop takes f4, and now white won the pawn, sure, but now black won a piece. So black is ahead now. Will we see rook takes e7? No, g3 was played instead, trying to kick away a knight, saying that I can always capture the pawn later. Knight to d3 was played, attacking this pawn over here. Knight to c4, defending that pawn, saying that I still have time to capture this pawn over here. B takes c, b takes c3. I don't really like b takes c3 because it helps undouble the pawns, but it makes sense because you basically just win a pawn with bishop takes over here. But instead of bishop takes, black realizes that there is no good way to defend this pawn, so I don't have to capture it immediately. Instead, I can defend my pawn first with rook e8. Good move, very, very good move. Now threatening to capture the pawn. So knight a5 was played, trying to just win the pawn, but it's not in time because after knight takes c3, knight c6, double attacking the pawn. Black can even just go back and defend the pawn. Bishop to f6 is completely playable, but instead bishop d4 was played. Black decides to go on the offensive, now counter-attacking the king instead, saying that you can capture my pawn, I'll capture your pawn with check. If you want to trade, I want material, I'm very happy with that. So knight takes e7, taking with check, king f8, now two pieces are attacking the knight, knight d5, and now bishop takes f2, now recapturing, taking back another pawn with check. So black is very happy here to trade pawns. King g2 was played, bishop back to d4, rook a6, now attacking this pawn, but simply bishop e5, defending everything. And now this bishop is on an outpost, and it can't be touched. Knight c7, the idea probably to reroute here and again focus, pile pieces onto the weak pawns. Good try from Cole, recognizing all the positional weakness and trying to gain counterplay by attacking them. Rook to b8, black is very happy to trade pieces. Rook a8, forcing a trade of rooks. The trading, and now this knight is very miserable. So king to e7, activating the king. Perhaps some other ideas might have been to win the pawn here, or maybe like some other maneuver to make use of the knight. King's knight c7, trying to come back here. f5, just trading. Okay, check, nothing much. Check. Now getting out check, winning the pawn. Right, exerting pressure on the bishop. Again attacking the weak pawn. Simply pushes because the bishop is defended by the knight. Knight to a5 check. King just moves up, getting even more active. Knight to b7. So white is running out of ideas now. King b4. Getting ready to trade to take the piece, take the pawn because the knight is defending this pawn. Knight d8, threatening a fork over here, although it isn't really a threat because the bishop is defended. King takes, and now these triple pass pawns are ready to roll down the board. So knight e6, not really threatening anything because again the pawn is defended, but white doesn't really have much to do here. So c4, getting ready to push the pawn all the way. Knight f4 is a bit of a mistake because it simply gives up another pawn and allows the trade to happen. So knight takes, black of course jumps at the opportunity. G takes, bishop takes, king h3, maybe just getting out of the way. G5, king g4. This complex is untouchable. c3 and just queen, and very quickly checkmate on the board. So very smooth game from Zephyr. Nice try from Cole, recognizing all the mistakes in the end game, but unfortunately when you're down a piece in the end game, it's just too difficult sometimes. Unless with only one knight on the board, it's difficult to win back material unless there's Fox. But with the way Zephyr played, they denied everything. So very good showing from Zephyr. In the final game here from the match, we have another e4, e5, another Vienna game, another max lunch defense, c4, we have c same one, but this time we see bishop c5 instead. We see bishop c5, queen g4. Now trying to claim that you're black, you can't copy everything, I'm going to force you to go back. But g6 was played, now weakening this f6, this f7 square even further. So queen f3, retreating back, threatening checkmate over here, very sneaky. King at knight f6, knight g to e2, maybe preparing to develop the knight this way, maybe preparing d4. Castles d3, now preparing to take advantage of this weak complex without the fianchetto bishop by playing bishop g4, bishop g5. Knight d4 was played to apply pressure here, but simply trades. Bishop to g5 was played. Interesting. So white recognizes that it's okay to give up this knight because this knight is stronger. This knight is stronger. Rather than this knight is stronger, I should say that after bishop g5, if takes here, queen has to move. Maybe you can capture first and then rook b1. Okay, maybe not rook b1. You can actually come back. This might be very strong as well. And after something like this, or even this, to plant your bishop here on the f6 square, white will be in a very comfortable position. Maybe even rook b1 is also fine. Trying to maintain this bishop here and maybe plan some sort of checkmate or some sort of attack on the queen side. However, this allows queen b4 check, and after f1, e2 maybe, allow the rooks to move. Yeah, maybe if bishop has to come back anyway, then maybe rook b1 is not that great because you don't want to allow this check. So maybe this, yeah, and then play on long-term weaknesses on the dark squares here on the king side, and black is very happy. White is very happy with moves like even d4 can be played in the future as well to grab full control of the center. Okay, but instead, after bishop g5, king g7 was played, trying to hold on to the knight, but that is a terrible mistake because after knight to d5, another piece joins the fray. Of course, e5 is also an option here, threatening to capture and fork, double attack. After bishop to e7, then fork here. Queen takes, bishop takes, king takes, knight d5, king g7, knight takes c7 here. Yeah, then white just ends up a piece in this position over here. So e5 is the most clean way of playing. But knight d5 also has the same idea, just simply applying another attacker over here. And after bishop e7, knight takes e7, queen takes e7. Now this eternal pin is very, very painful. All these three pieces are tied down, the rook can't do anything. And here, queen f4 is the way to go. Targeting this pawn over here, saying that, you know what, I have all the time in the world. My bishops are doing a great job of keeping your pieces immobile, so I will just win everything. And I'm threatening rook h6, bishop h6 check to win the rook. Bishop h6 check to win the rook. So, but however, white didn't spot it. Zephyr didn't spot it. Zephyr instead castled queen side, trying to attack on the king side, preparing this h4 h5 idea, which is also very good as well. Queen e5 was played, trying to get out of the pin. h4, trying to play h5. h6 was played, forcing the issue. And here, white can just sidestep. Just play bishop f4, chase the queen away, and continue on this attack over here. Maybe even sack the exchange. However, white sort of gave up the tension here by playing bishop takes f6, queen takes f6, and now the tension is pretty much lost. h5 can still be played, but it doesn't really do anything now. g5, everything is closed. There are light squared weaknesses for sure on the king side, but if the queen's going off the board soon, nothing much to take advantage of. Queen takes f6, king takes f6, f4 was played, trying to still open things up. G takes f4, rook df1, d6, captures with check, captures his two pieces were attacking, captures another pawn, and now another pawn is hanging. But h7 first, targeting this pawn. Bishop e6 was played, developing. Simply trading and then winning the pawn, c7 pawn, and now this pawn is still under attack. These two pawns are weak. Rook f8, trying to take control over the open file. c3, maybe giving some squares for the king. D takes, rook takes. Okay, interesting. Maybe this could have been played, forcing the king over to the f file, and then winning a rook here. Okay, maybe not now, not here. If here, then you can win the rook. But if here, then you can check here maybe. Check here. Here. Maybe just win the pawn. Yeah. If I guess it's sort of like a testing move. If king here, then you can win the rook. But if black finds the right move, then the king is not capturing the h pawn or defending the h pawn anymore. You can just win the pawn on the b file, and then after, like, c takes, king takes, this will be completely fine as well. White will still be completely winning. Okay, 2 pawns up. When I said rook takes c3 was played, not so advisable, because you're still attacking 2 pawns, and you want to capture towards the center anyway to strengthen your pawn center. So maybe white was worried about some rook f2 ideas, maybe. So worried about not being able to defend everything nicely, the king being unable to move. So maybe was worried about rook f2, and that's why white decided to capture the rook, since that this can be countered. Oh yeah, that was indeed white's idea. Black did indeed play rook f2, and then white decided to play rook c2 to counter it and allow either a trade of rooks or the king to be able to step back up to the second rank. So rook takes c2 was played, giving up the rook. Rook king takes c2. Now white got what they wanted. Rook f6, trying to check and win the pawn, but rook d1, countering again, but giving up this pawn in exchange. Rook f2 check. king d2, rook f1. Maybe not much can be done at this point. White is up 2 pawns. Rook f1, trying to go from behind maybe. King c3, getting a king a bit more active. Rook a1, going after this pawn, but simply a3. King takes h5, take this pawn. King d4. Now preparing to win the d pawn and push the pass pawns. Rook e1, keeping an eye on this pawn. This rook is doing a good job of guarding both the b pawn, the g pawn, and the d pawn, which are in turn defending the other pawn. So white's position is very solid here, and it's hard to get access to this king here in the center because of all the pawns. King d5 to win the pawn. King g4, king takes d6, h5, e5. Just escort the pawn all the way to victory. h4, king g3, preparing h4. e6, just pushing pawns. h4, e7, h3. h3, g takes h3, king takes h3. So giving up the pawns. Black has no way of actually creating a pass pawn in this scenario, so h3 was had to be played. There's nothing much to be done here. G takes h3, king takes h3, king d7, getting ready to escort the pawn. Rook e5, maybe preparing to check. e8 check, rook takes, king takes, and this is pretty much over because you can just queen and mate. So the king runs over, trying to harass, but very quickly, even though Zephyr once again has time trouble, only 20 seconds on the clock, whereas Cole has 2 minutes. But the position speaks it all. The position says it all. After rook d6, and white is prepared to just ladder mate. I will see if that happens. King f3, rook f6 check, king g2, king g7 check, rook h2, and rook h6 checkmate. So it was in this position that Zephyr won this match against Cole. Very close match. Both players showed decent understanding. However, of course, because of some blunders and some too little too late um, showings, the game ended as it did. So good job to both players, and we've covered chapter 39, and so that's all of the games that I'll be looking at for this stream. That's how so this is how we'll be doing things from now on. Me and Mary will be picking games from groups, and if like the group really has very few games, like some groups have like 12 games in total, and we pick maybe 1 or 2 games, we might cover 2 groups in 1 week. So this is of course in hopes that we can cover all of the groups before the year ends, which is very very soon. There are only like 4 or 5 weeks left before the new year comes, so we need to step up the pace. So make sure if you want a game or a position to be analyzed or commentated on, please feel free to DM me on Meridian, or even send the position to the Google form in the links that are provided in the Discord group, to let us know which positions that you want us to look at, and what specific advice maybe we can give you guys as well. So feel free to give me any feedback, DMs or in the chess club. Everything is fine. Thanks for watching. See you guys next week. Meridian will be here again 8 p.m. GMT plus 8. So if that, I think is that everything. I think that's everything. So thanks for watching. Johnny.